But then the rest of the year, it's actually just as rainy as it is in a rainforest. And in fact, I was just there last week, and I was astounded by how high the rivers are. There's been so much rain recently, and I know that that presents a challenge for the site and for keeping things in order and making sure everything is working, and for vehicles as well. So these two gentlemen do an amazing job at just keeping things running, and they do much more than that as well. They're working with the reintroduced Scarlet Macaws. So Ted joined us back in 2019, at the end of 2019. And Ted comes from a background, when we're chatting and getting to know each other, he had a ton of practical experience. And often we get people that join the team, they come from a more academic background. And I actually really value people that have practical hands-on experience. And so I was like, heck yeah, Ted, you can come and join us. If you could fix stuff and make things work and all this kind of stuff. So Ted's done that. And now is more than ever is actually directly involved with the birds and the monitoring and doing a fantastic job. We were out in the field last week looking at breeding macaws, and where Ted has been monitoring one of those nests as well. So really great to have Ted on the team. And then sitting next to Ted is Rup. Rup joined our team in 2020. Rup is from the local area, and he joined the team when we were really feeling the crunch with the lack of volunteers and really struggling during the COVID pandemic back in 2020. And so Rup joined the team to help with just sort of keeping the site going, keeping the birds fed, and because the rescued birds that are like 80 birds that we have that are breeding birds, and it's their job to have babies that we then reintroduce. Those birds all need daily care and all the cleaning and everything else, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with. When we have 80 of them, that's quite a task. And so Rup joined doing that, and we saw that Rup was going above and beyond. And so as in any work environment, if you're a good worker, you get praised by being given more work. So we gave Rup more work, and he's been doing a great job and is taking on some leadership and some responsibility for some of the site management as well, which is really great. We're pleased to see that, and to have a member from the local community in a key role in the organization. So these two gentlemen are going to be telling you about our work in Punta Islita. And I think I've rambled on enough already, and I'm going to hand it over to them. So Ted, over to you. And I think you're doing a screen share as well.
Yeah, so if I could just share the screen, please.
So we've got, just to also mention that Ted is from the UK. So he's got a fantastic accent, just like myself. And Rup is, as I mentioned, is from the Punta Islita area, and he's speaking in his second language. So that's a remarkable achievement for anybody, I think. So you'll also notice he has a fun accent as well, which might be different to what you're expecting. So good, over to you guys.
Excellent. Well, as Sam said, my name is Ted. This is Ruperto. I'm the site manager here at our Islita site. We're here today to talk to you about reintroduction of the Scarlet Macaw in the Punta Islita area, and how we use our methods to bring color back to the Costa Rican skies. So firstly, what is our goal with this release? Our goal is to bring Scarlet Macaws back to their historical range where they have previously gone extinct. We are doing this by reintroduction. So we are currently working in the Islita area. Over the past decade, we have had three successful reintroductions. And over time, we're seeing that population is starting to spread. So the reintroduction this year is more about bolstering that population as it spreads and finds more roosting sites and nesting areas and food further afield. So to fully understand why the scarlet macaw needs our help, we need to look more at the history of the scarlet macaw and why they need our help. So to understand that, we're going to start at the beginning. A scarlet macaw can lay a clutch of around 2 to 4 eggs. They incubate those eggs for around 28 days. Once they're hatched, they're not like a chicken or a duck. They look a little like this, a big pink ball of fluff that is very vulnerable. They don't open their eyes right away, so they are completely dependent on their parents to watch out for them and feed them. So they're at this phase for about a month, and then they enter what I like to call the awkward teenager phase. They enter this phase after around a month. I call this the awkward teenager phase because they spend the whole time in the nest, which is their home, eating, making noise, and not helping at all with anything. So they stay in the nest until around 80 to 85 days, when they start to look something like this. This is Joan. Joan is a scarlet macaw that was born here in 2018. This is her after recently fledging the nest. So when they fledge the nest, they take that first flight from the cavity hole or the nest box, wherever it is that they have been staying. And they land on that first tree or perch, and really comprehending how big the world is, they may stay there for a few days frightened. Their parents bring them food and try and encourage them to move around and help forage with them. So they stay with their parents for around a year. As you can see here, this parent is feeding its chick. They stay with their parent and they learn all the behaviors they need, the food that they need to forage, roosting sites. And after around a year, they'll start socializing with other birds, possibly even finding a partner. And once they've found a partner, they still need 4 or 5 years to mature to mature enough to be sexually active. And even when they are mature enough to have chicks, it still takes them a few years until they're successful. This gap at the beginning of their life, where they're not being productive at all, leaves the population open to threats such as this. So this is a scarlet macaw that has clearly been taken from a nest at a very young age. He has been taken because he is a scarlet macaw, and they are a very sought after pet. The patterns that they have and the ability to mimic human behavior makes them very desirable. Luckily, education in Costa Rica and laws with parrots and habitat has greatly improved this, but unfortunately, this is still an issue. Another issue facing the scarlet macaws is habitat loss because of the lumber and agricultural industry. From the 1950s well into the 1980s, there was great expansion in this field. And what this meant is that we saw a lot of the dry forest that Sam was talking about. These tropical dry forests nearly went extinct. And unfortunately, these macaws need these forests, not only for roosting and foraging, but for nesting opportunities as well. So scarlet macaws use natural cavities formed in historic trees. And when the birds lost these historic trees, unfortunately, they lost some very dependable cavities. So in this photo here, you can see that they're using a dead palm tree. This is a royal palm that is a very soft tree, and it will only last a few years after dying. And what has happened here is the top is hollowed out, and the macaws are using that hollowed out cavity to put their eggs in and rear chicks. Unfortunately, with this kind of nest, they can flood, or even worse, they can collapse. And we have seen this in the past. This is Mary Ann. Mary Ann was brought to us in 2017, shortly after her nest collapsed. She was reared here by our very dependable team, and she was then released in 2019. Unfortunately, shortly after being released, she sustained an injury to her beak, which you can see in this photo here. Luckily, she made a full recovery, and she was then put back into another release flock. This is her on the right with her partner Flybird. They have actually started looking into the nest boxes and doing a bit of house shopping. So we're very excited to get these guys out into the wild, because I think in the coming years, they're going to start wanting to have chicks. This is Boo Boo. So Boo Boo was born at our captive breeding center in 2020. He is our first ever foster egg. So he was laid in an egg with 2 other fertile eggs. He was the youngest. So the 2 older chicks had already hatched. And unfortunately, the parents were struggling to keep up with the food demand of those 2 birds. So Kerry, our bird manager at the time, decided to try fostering. And he was given to Ario and Aria, 2 macaws that were sat on unfertile eggs laid around the same time. Luckily, there was no problems and they accepted the egg, and he hatched. He was a very healthy, loved young individual. Unfortunately, around a week before he was due to fledge, the mother Aria passed away. This was horrible news, because a single scarlet macaw trying to raise a chick is a very hard thing indeed. So Kerry stepped in and was not only feeding Ario, the father, but was feeding Boo Boo. This was a hard time for everyone involved, but luckily Boo Boo did above and beyond, and now he is with the rest of the birds waiting for release. So now I want to talk to you about breeding for release. So one good thing about breeding for release is that we have a population of macaws that, because of behavior issues or inabilities to fly, they can't be released. But the breeding program here allows them to contribute to a wild population, even if they can't be wild themselves. So if we didn't have the breeding program here in Islita, Lola and Alvin here wouldn't be able to be free individuals. Another benefit of this breeding for release is that we can release individuals in areas, we can release flocks of birds in areas where the scarlet macaw has historically gone extinct. And this can be beneficial in many ways. Obviously, we all want to see these birds back in the wild where they belong, but we can use this method to bridge the gap between disconnected populations of macaws in the near future. So now we know why we're doing it and how we're doing it. We need to look at the individual birds. So I want to talk to you about the release flock and the processes we are undergoing currently to get these birds ready for release. So the first step is making sure that all of our birds are at optimal health. We do this through many methods. Firstly, whenever you think about optimal health, you think about diet. So as you can see in the left-hand bowl here, we've got a mixture of fruits, papaya, plantain, orange, sunflower seeds, chickpeas, and other powders and things like that that give the birds all the energy and nutrition they need. On the right, there's some wild food, but I'll get into that a bit later on. So this is Sophia. Sophia is undergoing fecal screening. It sounds very scientific, but what we do is we take a bit of poo from all of the aviaries and look at it under a microscope. What we're looking for is internal parasites. And if we find any evidence of internal parasites, then we'll treat those birds and look at the fecal screen again. This ensures that they're healthy on the inside. Another thing we do is that not only do we have our devoted team here in Islita, we have monthly visits from our vet, Ricardo. Now, he is extremely important when it comes to the lead up to the release, because he not only helps us look for internal and external parasites, he helps us look for diseases that the birds may have got as well. So like polyoma virus, chlamydia, and other things like that. If we were to find any of them, we would take the bird out, because the last thing we would want is to release a bird that is sick or possibly introduce a disease or a virus into the wild population. So once we know that our birds are at optimal health, we start looking at their behavior. Rather than talk to you dully about this chart of behaviors and what's positive and what's negative, I thought we could look at some photos and videos of them. So here is a wild macaw in our Guanacaste in Islita preening itself. This is a very good behavior to see. It's hygienic, it keeps their feathers ready for flight, and it also gives us a good insight into the social dynamic of a group. Birds that are willing to preen each other have a good social bond, and especially when you're looking at a flock that you're going to release, they need to depend on each other. So if there's one individual that isn't preening itself or not being preened by the flock, it could be a sign of malnourishment, or that he is not being accepted by the group, and then we would have to remove him, because if he isn't part of the group when we release him, there's a lesser chance of him surviving. Another very important behavior we look at is flying. Obviously, whenever you think of a scarlet macaw, you think of them soaring through the air. So a wild bird spends hours at a time flying through the air. Unfortunately, our captive birds don't have that opportunity, but there are things we can do about that. So here we have Amy, one of our field biologists, doing flight training. Every morning before it gets too hot in the day, we train the birds to exercise, and that's using different objects or noises to stimulate movement and get them moving around the aviary. This has had a great second effect. So like I said, Boo Boo and Marianne, they've had to have some help in the past. And that means that they have attachments to humans that we don't like to see. And this flight training has helped them have an adequate fear of humans. Now that we know that they can fly like a wild bird, it's important that they know how to eat like a wild bird. So here is a royal palm fruit that one of our young chicks is trying to work out how to eat. It can take them a little while, but they get it eventually. And once we know that they can identify those foods, we try and give them to them as whole as possible. So as you can see, there's 2 macaws eating a whole bunch of royal palm fruits here. This is how they would find the fruit in the wild. So we want to encourage this kind of behavior as much as possible. And leading up to the release, they'll get nothing but wild foods like this. But they don't just get palm fruits. This is Flybird. He is picking almonds straight off of the branch. This is exactly what we want to see when they're out in the wild. And knowing that they can forage for themselves and fly adequately, it's important that they understand what dangers await them once they're released. There are birds that might try and predate on them, or mammals that might try and catch them while they're sleeping. We have seen a lot of these behaviors. The only animal they haven't come in contact with yet is a snake. This is my poor attempt at a snake. It still needs a little bit of work, but the idea is that we'll introduce this puppet once to see how the birds react to the puppet. We won't do it more than once because we don't want them to get used to having that kind of danger around them. So now that they can fly, they know how to feed themselves, they're almost ready for release. So when we release them, we want them to be identifiable. So here we have Arco and Iris, I believe it is. That means rainbow in Spanish, if I'm correct. They are siblings, if I remember. They have markings on their beak, which allows us, when we're doing behavior observations, to identify individual birds so we can look at their behaviors and make sure that they're doing everything they need to do to be wild. We also take small cuttings out of their tail feathers, but we won't do this until they're ready for release. So once all of this is done, we will open the door to the OSA social aviary. Right next to where they roost is where they'll be able to leave. So we'll start by putting food just outside of their aviary. And this will encourage them to slowly come out and explore the area just around the aviary, and they can return and go back inside and eat as well when they're comfortable. After a week or two, we believe that they'll start to spread out around site and they'll find the wild bird feeders. If you've been to Islita, you'll see these feeders. And we expect for the first 30 to 60 days, they'll be very dependent on us. eating at these feeders. The whole time, the whole process, our team is here watching these birds, making sure that they're all safe and secure. When they start to leave sight, it's a lot harder to monitor them, but we'll do our best. So we've estimated that there are around 51 macaws in the wild currently. We are planning to reintroduce 14 more. And I have other great news. We have had more chicks in the wild this year than ever. So once these birds have fledged, which these two are the last two to fledge this year, and hopefully they'll be fledging in the next few days. Once these guys fledge and we've released these birds, this will bolster the population of the macaws here to over 70. But on behalf of everyone here and our release flock, thank you for your ongoing support. Everything you guys do to help us helps these guys. So thank you very much. I'll be passing it back over to Sam now for a bit of Q&A.
Fantastic. That's great, Ted. That's really, really great to see. And I'm very impressed with the snake. I think that's great. Do you want to stop the screen share and then we can see people? So I'm going to open it up for questions. We had a question already, which was, how many breeding pairs do we have at Punta Islita?
Oh, that is a great question.
And I know Kerry might be able to help out. She's okay. We're not on the latest info. You do a quick count. You do a quick count, and I'm gonna.
So we don't just breed Scarlet Macaws here. We also breed Great Greens. We have roughly 10 breeding pairs of Scarlets and maybe 15 breeding pairs of Great Greens.
Right.
Accurate guess.
That was what I had come to as well. So yeah, okay, good. We're on the same page on that one. We also the thing is we also have other Scarlet Macaws that are not quite, they're not breeding, and they're they're in aviaries with their friends, sort of thing. And we had quite a sex ratio imbalance where we had lots of males and not as many females. So that's something we've worked to. We even had, when we arrived a few years ago now, we had females and females together. And it was like, well, that's not very good for a breeding program. That's not going to quite work. We're open-minded, but that's not going to work. So I had a question I was going to ask about the color on the beak, but you answered that one. Actually, Amy is asking, and I don't know, Amy, but I don't know where. It's nice to also think about where people are coming from as well. I'll try and add that in when I know that info. Amy, let us know where you are, Amy. Will the breeding pairs eventually be released back into the wild to live out the rest of their days? Ted?
The short answer to that is no. If they were releasable, we would have released them. There is often a good reason why they're not released, and it could be behavior, age, or their ability to forage for themselves. If we release birds that can't forage for themselves, there's no chance of survival there. And a lot of the time it's because they can't fly, and these birds need to be able to fly.
Yeah, that's right. And then, I mean, these are rescue birds, and some of them are, as those of you with parrots will know, some of them are a little bit goofy, and they're not really, I think we forget just how difficult it is to live in the wild. I mean, the wild animals are Olympians, and if they're not, they get eaten by something. And so these birds that we release have to be in really tip-top condition. So we've got another question here. Have conditions changed? Excuse me. Have conditions changed enough in the native habitat that we're confident the reintroduction effort will succeed? Are there still significant changes? And that's from Emily in Hawaii.
Wow.
Hawaii, I think I should say.
That's a great question. The main lack that these birds have in the wild is cavities. And we supplement that with artificial nest boxes and try to mimic the cavities that they do like. there's always room for progression, but we're always doing that kind of work. We're always putting more nest boxes up. We're always checking cavities to make sure that they're usable for these birds. There is plenty of food for them here. So at the minute, it's education to make sure the threats don't get worse and that there's enough nest boxes and natural cavities for them to keep breeding.
Great. Yeah, and that's just part of management, isn't it? And I think the thing there is to say, well, you know, the scarlet macaw was extinct locally, and we can put them back. We know the environment isn't perfect. The ecosystem function isn't there completely. There's lots of food trees, but there might not be the old trees, because scarlet macaws are big birds and they need big cavities. But we can manage that with nest boxes. And for those of you in North America and Europe, I mean, we're all very familiar with nest boxes for our garden birds. So it's very much the same thing. Just going back, Amy, who asked the question about whether pairs would be released, she's coming to us from Connecticut. So that's northeast of the States. I love that we're asking this as well. And I think that was Armin's suggestion in Germany, who suggested that to us earlier. So thanks for that. I'd missed another question here, connecting from Italy. Zulal asks, all of this must be the result of a lot of hard work. It's remarkable. Are there any regulations and local codes that mandated by the local government regarding the habitat and species recovery, the situation if the industry is under control? There's really not any industry where in Punta Islita, and just the situation. So are the conditions mandated by the government? So I think there's lots for you to talk about there.
Yeah, so the government have made a lot of laws. One, to make it illegal to own a parrot, and two, they've made a lot of laws that make people put aside a lot of land, and trees that are sought out and harvested a lot have been put under protection, and they've made it illegal to cut down these trees.
And then I'll just add to that, we have to work with the local government to, we're not the owners of these birds, we're custodians. And so we're the breeding center. And so we actually have a legal representative who, we hire somebody who is the legal representative for the birds. And that Ted and Rup have to work with this guy who's really great and brings a lot of expertise to the organization. Ted mentioned that we also work with a vet. So there's a lot, I mean, it's quite bureaucratic and complex. And there's a lot goes on there behind the scenes, as well as sort of the green fingered part of looking after the birds. There's a lot of administration as well, just to make it all possible. Kylie from Florida says hi, and what are the tail feather clippings for? Identification in the wild, DNA analysis, and also asks about the markings on the beaks and how long they last.
Yeah, so we cut the markings into the tail feathers so that when they're in flight or far away, we can identify them from wild birds, because the wild birds have whole feathers, and we cut just small patterns into the tail feathers there.
Zigzags down the sides and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll only do this just before release, so I haven't done this yet. The nail polish we do on a regular basis if we're making behavior observations or anything like that. It's to identify the birds as individuals. It tends to only last around 2 weeks because the birds like to beak clean.
And that allows you to work out who's interacting with who and who's forming a nice tight cohort that might become the release group. Because we're talking about releasing maybe half a dozen birds, 6 or 7 birds, if there's a nice group of them, because those social connections are really important for when the birds are released. You can't, we know that macaws are vastly intelligent and social birds. And so you can't just release an individual macaw and expect it to survive in the wild. It survives through its network and its friends. And so that's a really important thing that the team monitor it prior to release. And this all takes time and effort. And it's something that we're still learning about and developing techniques around. So just to say why that's important. And then also after the release, the markings that Ted's talking about, that helps us monitor birds at the feeder. And then we can keep track of who's coming in or not. And then if there's an absence, we know that somebody's not coming back to the feeder and we need to look after them, need to go find them, see where they are. And then that's where the connections with the local community can help, because we put the word out that we're, have you seen a lone macaw? We seem to have lost one, or something like that. Okay, Wayne is coming to us from Ontario, Canada, and is asking, when we say that we have 70 scarlets, is that in all of Costa Rica, or where is it? So Ted, if you can elaborate on that.
That is in the Islita area. So they were locally extinct. And then around 10 years ago, we began releasing them here. Sorry, it's getting to feeding time and our birds here are getting very rowdy.
Yeah, you can hear them in the background. Great.
Yeah. That is all locally here. We are seeing them.
I know, when you go for dinner.
Oh,
I think Mary, I think Mary didn't mean to do that. Keep going, Ted.
So we can see them up to 20 kilometers away from site on a daily basis now, but that is a relatively recent thing. They were staying pretty localized in Islita, and the reason we're introducing more is because they're starting to spread out. So all of those 70 macaws are in the local area.
There are other populations of macaws in Costa Rica. There's a scarlet macaw population here where I am, and that continues down the Pacific coast, and the stronghold is down in the southwest in the Osa Peninsula. But we're also seeing our field team that are working with the great greens in the northeast are also seeing the increase of the wild scarlet macaw population up there. So they're doing well, they're breeding and having babies, and we're seeing those numbers increase. So, and I think, let's see, George asked about birds in Uvita. That would have been from the remnant wild population. But what we're doing in Punta Islita is we're restoring a population. We're putting a population back where they used to be, but were no longer found. And so it's really reintroduction. We're restoring population, because although scarlet macaws and other macaws can fly long distances in a day, they don't actually tend to. And it would take centuries for the wild populations to find their way back to Punta Islita. But we can use this management technique, this hands-on work with our skilled team, and restore a population. Okay, Natasha from England asks, who's staying up late for this? Thank you, Natasha. Would you guys consider putting tracking devices on a few birds to help monitor them post-release?
That is something that we're trialing with great greens now. And if that is successful, that may be something that we look into with the scarlet macaws in the future, yes.
I would say that we're unlikely to do that with scarlet macaws in Punta Islita now, because we already have a population that we're adding into. And so that supports the release, and we know that it's possible to do that. But when we go to a new location, if we were to start reintroduction further up the road and to expand this effort on the Nicoya Peninsula, then we might do it if we're doing a new area. Kelly from Zootampa, hi Kelly, asks, in the US, protected birds such as trumpeter swans are all banded to help track identity. Is that possible for macaws?
So all of our macaws do have steel rings. When they're born here at around 21 days, we'll put a steel ring on their leg. Unfortunately, once they've been released, it is near impossible to be able to read that ring unless we recapture the bird. So that's why we use the tail. We clip the tail feathers and use the nail polish on the nose, just so that temporarily we can keep a tab on those birds. But yes, we are looking into other methods to make it more easy to identify individuals. But because the scarlet macaw has such a strong beak, it can be very hard to find a material that will stay on them for many, many years.
Great, and it is quite a scary job putting these rings on the macaws. If we put closed rings on the young birds, and that's much easier. But if we we went in the few times that we've had to ring mature birds with open rings. These rings are so strong that to actually close the ring onto the leg, it requires incredible force, and it's it's really quite a job. Okay, I'm certainly, my dyslexia is being challenged here with this gentleman's name. I'm hoping it might be shortened to Thanos. I'm not sure if is that the case, or I don't know if you want to jump in. But anyway, I'm going to ask you a question to Ted. Is there any way to prevent inbreeding in a small population? And I can maybe help with this one as well if need be.
Yeah, so a genetic bottleneck is a great concern in small populations of macaws, and releases like this definitely help stop that. There are ways we could work with other NGOs maybe to diversify our genetic gene pool. I don't know if Sam has anything else to add to that.
Yeah, so what I saw during my PhD times, excuse me, and then also what we see with the wild populations of great greens, and just in general, is actually in the wild, it's quite normal to see a dominance of several pairs that produce young. And so that influences the genetic diversity of the next generation, if you like. We have got blood samples from all of the birds, and we are working with a student to look at the genetics of, first with the great greens, so that we can manage the genetics better. But we'll also be doing that with the scarlets as well. And then, like Ted mentioned, one direction that we hope to go in future is more collaboration with other organizations, and then sort of bringing different birds, or trading birds, giving them birds to release over there and bringing birds here. And so we're looking at that kind of, again, that management to maximize that, and that's a way of sorting out. I actually talked to a geneticist. I've never managed to wrap my head around genetics, not to the extent of a higher degree kind of level. I talked to a geneticist at my university, and he said, well, evolution will sort it out. If there's a problem, if you're doing something that's kind of, having a bit of an influence, give it 1,000 years. And if there's a pressure there, an evolutionary pressure, evolution will sort it out. And certainly in times like now, in these, that pressure is going to be felt very keenly. So that's an important thing that, people are concerned, that we might not have pure genetics of the scarlet macaw or something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, but they're not extinct. And who's to say what the genetic makeup of the scarlet macaw will be in 1,000 years? And this is kind of like, this at least gives them the chance. Okay. Marta is asking, will the released macaws stay together forever, or do they also split up through their lives? From Poland.
Oh, excellent. So scarlet macaws do tend to mate for life. Some of these birds are siblings, or they've just known each other for a very long time. So I'm sure once they get out into the wild and they start to get to know some of their other wild birds, they'll start to pair off, especially during the breeding season, and then they'll probably meet back together during the non-breeding season. But the flocks can vary in sizes. Sometimes there'll be 18 macaws flying around in his leader all together, and another day there'll only be 5. They are a very social species, and they're always interacting with each other.
Yeah, great. Well, for the moment, that's all the questions on the chat, and I think that's a great moment to actually get Rup involved and ask. I've got a couple of questions that I wanted to ask Rup to help Rup share a bit about his experience. So, Rup, you're working on the site and you're responsible for some of the scarlet macaws. Tell us a little bit about how many birds you're working with and who they are.
Hi, I'm Rup. Yeah, I work with OSA. I have the birds for release. I have 24 birds now in OSA. So I work all days, all mornings with the birds. Sometimes with that, feed the birds. I try training in the morning because they know because you need fly all day, so they need the training.
Great.
With birds.
Yeah.
So
That's great. And do you have a particular favorite bird from the group, from the released group? Well, the group that will go
yeah,
out.
yes, I do. Miriam, she's my favorite bird because I don't know. She is for the history that you have. So the history is very interesting. So, but she's very curious too. So it's a bird maybe strong. Maybe can I say
Yeah.
it's strong?
Nice.
Yeah. So it's very important because uh, she how many years before she released 5 yeah. 5 years ago she released, so she come back here, so this is good. So I learning for the bird
Yeah.
because she need more training or maybe so looking more for the birds, so it's good for there.
Very cool. And you talked a little bit about the training, and Ted talked about the training to get the birds flying and things like that. What other enrichment do you do on a regular basis? What kind of things do you do for enrichment?
So as I say, so I call branches or the palm leaf. So because they need learning for the leaf. So when she is fly and they're free, and so she
Yeah.
can see the leaf or she know the leaf, so they have the fruit. So it's very important for the bird. Made toys with a piece of wood too.
Yeah.
So
And are they chewing? They're chewing all the wood, I imagine.
yeah, it's good because sometimes the birthdays is stress, have stress. Entonces with the wood, she buy the wood, so it's
Yeah.
good for the.
Yeah. Great. And what does it mean? Excuse me. For the local community, what does it mean to have Scarlet Macaws in the village? And do people tell you about their experiences with the Scarlet Macaws and that kind of thing?
For the local people, so
Yeah.
it's good, because sometimes the boys, the school, uh, they see the birds in the Guanacaste tree. It's a big Guanacaste tree from my house, so it's a nest box. The last year, the birds make a nest box in the hole. So my neighbor have two boys, so she asked me the birds all time look in the morning or sometime in the afternoon in the Guanacaste tree. So sometimes ask me for the birds. So yeah, try to explain it. So the local people too, because
Nice.
I work here, so all people in the towns they know who is me. So they ask me for the birds. So telling the people, the local people, so is fascinated with the birds. It's very happy because so before no have so much birds, so now it's good. So the local people is more interested. So I talk about the palm tree too, because sometimes the people no have ideas. Can the bird make the nest box in the dead palm leaf? So now the
Yeah.
local people know. So
Yeah.
it's good for the local people. So
And
but
that's actually really good for us, because then people are telling you, oh, we've seen Scarlet Macaws in our field or things like that. And so we get these reports, this information. That's
yeah.
really good. Great, great. Well, we're coming up close to the hour. I think we should probably bring it to a close. Does anybody have any further questions at this moment? If you do, speak up or put it on the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to do a little bit of a wrap up, because one of the things, I mean, we talked a lot last year and in previous years about together we thrive. And this really is a team effort. Sarah and Kerry have done a great job of putting together information about the reintroduction and the efforts. But we've not had the uptake on donations that we would hope for and that we need to make this program happen. The birds need to have health checks. If we're going to release these birds, we need to be able to monitor them in the wild. Otherwise, we might lose them, and that would be a tragedy after all this time. We also need to, continue this this effort of looking after the birds and even just feeding them while they begin to learn about their wild environment. We can train them on the wild foods, but we can't expect them to know where to find that the moment they leave the aviary. So we have to support them in the wild with our bird feeders. And to make that possible, we need donations and support. And we would love if any and all of you want to break out your checkbooks, get online, make a great big donation, and help make this possible. And we can't do it without you. And the guys there in Islita putting their hearts and soul into this. And these birds are going to be the future generations of Scarlet Macaws, them and their offspring. That's when we really have success. And we'd love for you to be part of that. So we've already got the link in the chat. I'm sure we'll follow up as well. And we would just want to say thank you for those of you who've made it possible for us to get this far. And please badger anybody you know who might want to donate. Armin's got something there. That's wonderful. Thank you, Armin. Great. And if everybody wants to match Armin, that would be amazing. So thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation today. And I hope we can all get back on a call, and Ted will have some videos of the birds when they've been released. So if you can all contact me or Sarah or any of our team if you have any further questions, and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you again, and come and visit as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.